All right. So this is episode 3 of my podcast, and I'm here with Joel Bine, live in Austin, Texas, and a bird in the background that will be our companion for the podcast. He's making noise pretty often. And we were sitting having a great conversation, and now we are making a podcast out of it. And where we'll start is we were talking about the book, The Last Safe Investment, which I have not read, but I understand the idea is the last safe investment in some sense is yourself. And as we were talking about that, I was thinking about how to take it to a step further, that a truly safe investment is to invest in yourself, like psychologically and emotionally, to the point where no changing circumstance of life can harm you in any way. That you're able to enjoy like the pure pleasure of existence so much that the specifics of like money even don't affect you. You could live in a park and just be like having a ball. And I think that that's kind of where my philosophy stands right now. But I'm curious about your thoughts too, Joel. About that.
I mean, of course, the ideal would probably be have that level of inner peace and have financial security. But it's pretty opposite from most people in the culture, right? Typically, we think of financial security and saving for retirement, and it's very compartmentalized with just have enough money, and then when you're 65, you'll be happy. Mm-hmm. But let's start with happiness first, right?
Yeah. And like it's like the enoughness thing that Nathaniel Branden talks about like I'm starting to get to a place where I realize that what's the purpose of taking any action at all if you're not doing it from a place of knowing you're already enough. If the purpose of the action is to supplement a lack of enoughness or a lack of like just joy of being, why? Because then that's just like continued suffering in a way.
It's the dog chasing its tail.
Yeah.
It's constantly searching for the future. That's definitely what we're taught, like growing up with graduate from first grade to second grade and then eventually go to college and then get a job. And then, I mean, that's the sort of the conventional mold that's handed off to us, but we're not really taught much about inner peace, and that's pretty important.
Like actually never, right? Like never ever. And even in like general, this is like one of my frustrations with like general career advice world, there's like very little discussion of this, almost zero. As I started getting into like that personal development world, I feel like I spent a very long time like personally developing all of these characteristics, but it was just like, I'm trying to think, if you have like a cake, this weird visualization just came to my mind. If you have like a cake that has like rottenness in the center of it, but it's a crappy cake. I feel like most of the personal development stuff that I was exposed to for a long time was just like about like putting frosting on the cake and making the cake like a really good cake. It might even taste really good, but like, well, I guess it's not the best metaphor, because my metaphor would be that if you could make the center of the cake fixed or make it like really, really peaceful and good, that the outside of the cake will like naturally become everything that it needs to be. The same thing is true for me, or for I think people, that so many, almost all of us, work with effects, work with our productivity, or even blasting through resistance, or even all of these things to get what we think that we want, which we usually don't even know. But I'm saying if I work with the cause, meaning like for me, the supreme cause of almost all of it is getting down to the point of agency deep inside myself. Because I think that I choose almost every thought and emotion I experience, ultimately. It is a choice. It's very microsecond, but it does happen where, okay, I'm feeling this despair. I think I choose to feel resistance. My brain creates that and summons that for me. And if it's possible to get enough in touch with that point of agency so many problems go away. You don't have to do productivity exercises as much because you can just naturally choose to do the thing you want to do. You can choose to feel the feeling of motivation to want to do it rather than having to work with all these motivation. Same way about gratitude practice. Like, you don't even have to choose to be grateful. You don't have to even like do a practice. You can just choose to be grateful if you can get that in touch with your sense of personal agency. You can just choose it. That's not that easy, but if that is true, if that is possible, it makes more sense to me to invest time in honing that kind of thing. And then you have like, I want to like create this visualization for it, but you have like this like hierarchy. We have this thing at the top, and there's all these red lights. And if you turn the light at the top green, all the lights beneath it turn green too. So rather than working with all the little lights underneath and trying to turn them green one by one, just turn like the hierarchical one green, and everything else becomes green automatically. You don't have to worry about summoning the motivation to work out if you can get in touch with your agency that you can just choose to feel motivated to work out.
Oh, yeah. It's about a principled approach, basically a principled approach to growth rather than a hacking growth, a hacking approach. Like patchwork, it's really common in the sort of personal development world, is let's incorporate all these tips from Tim Ferriss's Tools of Titans and sort of force feed them into my life. And maybe there's some results there, but you're sort of missing the boat, where maybe just start working on your fundamentals of life. And you'll have some automatic, like if you start healing your relationship to yourself and you develop unconditional self-love and you develop intrinsic motivation and treat yourself well, like you genuinely want to treat yourself well, then you'll start moving your body and going to the gym more.
Because you want it.
Not because you think you should or I need to go exercise because that's a good personal growth tool. No, it's I want to be healthy and happier because I've gotten in touch with like my inner child, and like you're actually striking the root of things, and then all of a sudden it's an obvious after effect, like cause and effect, to go to the gym and take care of your body because you see your body as this like holy temple,
Yeah, it's like the natural evolution is that you want to be healthy and care about yourself because you care about yourself. You don't need to like. Yeah, that's fascinating. At the same time, this is funny coming from me because of what I've been talking about. At the same time, I did notice there was a period where I was constantly trying to feel self-love. I would lay in bed trying to feel I did this thing where I just was like, I'm not doing anything until I'm doing it because I love myself. Just like, I would feel this intense anxiety to get work done, and I refused to get work done because I was like, I'm not letting that be my motivator. I'm not going to let this anxiety that something's wrong with me be the reason I do things. It's not how I want to live. I felt like crap a lot of the time. And eventually I just started working out for a bit again, a little more. I started like eating healthier. And I noticed that in a way, love in general is also a verb largely, right? So there's ways to like still show myself that I love myself through the actions as well. And that's interesting coming from me because I've been talking so much like earlier and now about like the whole agency thing. It all comes from within, and don't work with the effects at all because it's a waste of time. It's like you were talking about earlier with like, I think you're talking about yoga, how like sometimes, in many cases, if you were a more emotionally calm, your body would be less tense. But by working with stretching those muscles and making the body less tense, you can also become emotionally more calm. So you can go the other way sometimes too. Like sometimes the effect can shoot back up through the wire into the cause if done correctly, it seems. And maybe that's true that like sometimes you can experience self-love authentically by doing the thing that's hard at first, and you're sort of like showing yourself. Ready?
Yeah,
it's a verb.
possible.
I'm showing myself love by working out.
Yeah,
does it make sense?
It's possible to go at it from that more extrinsic motivated place, and then that can turn into intrinsic motivation. Like I've done in the past when I like about 5 years ago, I started diving into health and fitness stuff and doing like 30-day challenges of 30 days of no gluten, 30 days of no dairy, and that was sort of like a tool, like a hack kind of thing, you could say.
Yeah,
it wasn't a root striking necessarily approach, but then I got in touch with how I felt once I eliminated that thing, and now I could tap into that intrinsic benefit, and then I could start operating from more of an intrinsically motivated place. So it's not that there's no value, and this goes back to what we've been talking about like this weekend about truth, and when we make different statements, that sometimes seemingly opposing statement is also true. Like it's a very playful thing when we use language, and it's like, yes, this is true, and it's also true this other way. Depends on how you frame it and like the context, but I think generally when we start thinking about cause rather than effect, it's a better frame.
Yeah.
Cut to the root rather than hack at the branches, you know.
Yeah.
It's a good mode of operation.
Yeah, I mean, you go deep to the root. For me, is I'm trying to get so deep that I'm even like pre-childhood trauma stuff, like get to like the seat of the will and the consciousness, and then like if you can actually control your mind, you can do anything. You can heal trauma quickly. You can do anything you want if you can control your mind, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. But I think that I had something about what you said about one of those things, not the dualistic stuff. Well, yeah, now I can't remember.
Well, I was gonna say about the root versus the tools kind of approach, root versus hacking approach.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can take something like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, where he's talking about conquering resistance, and if you feel resistance, then you need to just beat that, and that's how you get work done and creative work done. And yeah, there's absolutely value in that. But if you want to strike the root, you start asking more questions. Why am I having resistance in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And why do I have this one part of me that has resistance and this other part of me that wants to do the activity? Now you're going deeper into the psychological realm of these different parts, and maybe you can have a little conversation with each of these parts of yourself, rather than just take the basic shortcut of, oh, I feel resistance, therefore I need to beat it. You know, no, like let's get curious about, okay, what is it that like your most self, like your highest self of you want to create, like do this project. What are the feelings you're trying to achieve in your future self? Get connected to that, empathize with that, and then you'll get more intrinsic motivation rather than just kind of like forcing things, you know. But it doesn't mean there's not value in his thesis in that book, you know.
Why do you think? Because I've been trying to figure this out, and sometimes there's like obvious things. Maybe it's just like an I'm not worthy thing. Maybe not. Why do you think that we feel resistance to the things that we want most? Most of the time, it seems like it is the things that we want, like the things that bring us to. That's like where the greatest resistance comes. He talks about that. Why do you think that is? And I haven't finished the book. I read almost all of it, but like,
I think it's biological programming. So
really,
yeah, I think it goes back to what like Seth Godin calls the lizard brain. And then just the need for safety and survival and to be part of the group and comfort. And it's a lot harder to do creative work because you're expressing yourself individually. It takes more effort. We also want to take the path of least resistance is like the default, like just whatever you need to do to survive, and that's good enough. But if you want to do extra creative work, it's a lot easier to do something passive. It's easier to scroll on your phone than to sit down and create something and get into a flow state and do something hard. You have to, like, in order to get into a flow, I don't know if you read Flow, but like
I understand the concept of flow states.
To get into a flow state, he articulates that you need to move through the barrier that is the challenge of starting, which is what Pressfield's getting at as well.
So yeah, right.
It takes
it's just starting,
effort.
And then you're going.
It takes it takes a little bit of sweat.
But it's so minimal, that initial effort too. It's interesting how strong the resistance feels, considering.
That's why it's all about starting.
Even this podcast, when you were like, "Hey, let's record about that," I was like, But literally, it was as simple as grabbing a microphone and plugging it into a computer. It's not that simple,
because we're now, like, before we started recording, it was like just two of us. But now we're talking to the whole world potentially.
So there's like a.
Not that the whole world's gonna listen to this, but.
But there's like maybe one day. But there's like a social.
Yeah.
There's a slight. There's a
vulnerability there.
Yeah, and I guess there's like a little more psychological strain.
Yeah,
right.
I feel it right
I can
now.
already feel it for sure. Like the difference, even just having this piece of plastic here, right? There's like a tone of like. It's like we're like talking with more of a tone of novelty in our voice, or something. You know what I'm talking about? I don't even know how to transcend it. Like I don't know how to because we're just still having a conversation.
It's interesting. Oh man, this reminds me of
why is that happening?
Because there's knowledge that there's a third party listening. It's a disembodied third party.
Listening to listen to, not even being a part of it.
And also it's like published, it can be published on the web like permanently, and there's some sort of like, oh man, what am I exposing myself to? somebody could hear this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
eventually I think that as I have grown, I feel less and less concerned with like, it's so cliche to say what people think of me, because I care if people like me, I care if people think of me, but
But
like,
that's the programming. That's the biological programming,
yeah. So why is it that
I think.
a lot of personal development seems like it's increasing evolution, but if it's actually sort of in direct competition with evolution, if evolution's just about like essentially the propagation of genes to make more, a lot of personal development that feels like you're evolving as an organism usually results in a lot of people having less kids or having kids later, or it's just not as, it doesn't seem that related to children, although some people might say it's related to children because as you personally develop, you're increasing your value, right, in like the romantic market.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm Freudian with thinking everything we do is just for children, but if it is, or just for like biological, propagation, maybe it is though. It's like why, or maybe evolution is getting to this point where if evolution is more about survival, by evolving more we live longer, and we can eventually create technology that makes us live longer. So there's that as well. But then you have this other thing that for at least for me, my personal evolution feels like the more evolved I become, it's like moving closer toward a more traditional view of enlightenment. To become so satisfied in each moment that if reality were to freeze frame and fade to black, like in old 90s movies, you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? Old 90s movies, like at the end, they're like walking and then all of a sudden they like freeze frames on their smile and it fades to the credits, right? I would like, my ideal is that could happen at any given moment and it would be okay. Like that this is the end of my story.
Sure.
And so that's like another way of looking at just like pure satisfaction, contentment, presence in the moment. Which like we've talked about before doesn't mean there's no like other desires or goals, but I don't want to be motivated by the fear of not doing those goals. I want to be motivated just by like a simple desire to do them. But point is, why? Why would I be pushed toward this idea of that? Perhaps because it feels the best. Like it makes you, I think it's the least suffering and the greatest amount of happiness. Potentially. Or what we talk about with like Rand and Brandon and all that stuff is like, or even Eckhart Tolle, they talk about the joy of being or just the pleasure of raw existence.
Yeah.
Not needing anything, nothing. It just feels good to be a thing. And everyone feels good about that. That's sometimes I don't think you need to feel like you're enough. I think you just need to realize it feels good to be a thing. Like just existing. Even right now I'm feeling it a lot as I'm thinking about it. Like I'm a thing and it feels, it's an actual like pleasure. It's almost like a physical pleasure to be a thing.
It is.
It really is.
Beautiful.
It really is. And I bet if you were to meditate and focus on that, it can probably get pushed to a pretty intense extreme. I was actually in this Ram Dass lecture I was listening to. He was talking about how like some people like see like these Hindi monks and they think like, oh man, it's so sad to go and live alone forever. But he said that like a lot of them are basically in like a constant state of not like sexual, but like basically a constant state of orgasm, like 100% all their waking hours, and like so they're fine. I think all of that was like, why is there at least biologically, why is that what I'm interested in? Because why are we interested in not suffering? Because animals don't seem as interested. I guess they don't want to get hurt and they run away when something's trying to kill them. But suffering is a very strange thing. Why is there even this? Why do we even suffer at all? Because it doesn't seem very helpful. I guess it's a signal to get away from the threat, maybe.
All that's coming to mind for me is that if we're thriving, meaning the personal growth is contributing to our flourishment, then that makes us more attractive to the opposite sex. Or I don't know, I'm trying to think of the biological motivations for achieving higher levels of self-actualization. I mean, obviously there's just the pleasure of
But
growth.
why is there a biological motivation for that pleasure? Because pleasure feels good. But why would that be pleasurable? It might not. Some people think, I don't know, that not everything is like evolutionary.
I mean, if you're growing like your skills or whatnot, you're becoming more competent. That's going to increase your likelihood of survival, like make more money or.
But again, what about that enlightenment stuff? I would like to say that if I was completely present, if I'm completely accepting of the moment or whatever, that I could see a meteor right there. If I was at peace enough, it wouldn't even bother me. I would just give you a high five and then we would die. I'm not there yet, But I think that there's a desire for me to be there, where that wouldn't scare me. And I'm not afraid of death. I feel like fear of death seems almost every organism fears death. All of them. So maybe it's like a breaking of evolution. But why would we even be motivated to do that?
I don't know.
I don't think we have answers to these questions.
I don't know. I love that we like just riff on stuff. Like I love that this is raw.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the listener thinks, but I think that
My
it's
last
nice
podcast
and authentic.
I did myself, it was like this. I think it's like why most people love podcasting today.
Yeah.
Is that it's not like TV where you're going to have this list of topics that you like talk about. Right? In that sense.
That's what Rogan talks about. He
just fucking presses record and
That's
goes.
his philosophy. Like some people have asked him like, oh, so how do you like conceptualize and like think about the fact that you're inspiring people and changing their lives?
Shit.
And he's
he doesn't
like,
care
I
at
don't
all.
think about that. I just freaking talk to people.
He likes having conversations. And that's way
great.
better.
It almost goes back to the thing about just the pleasure of existence. I'm just having a conversation because I want to.
And I happen to be sharing it with others.
But I love that about podcasting because
it's a big thing today.
It just completely shatters the mold of the sort of corporate press, as Michael Malice puts it.
And that's so much crap, the corporate press. And like you just have a conversation, and basically people feel like they're getting to be a part of a good conversation.
Yeah, it's really down to earth, and you feel connected to the person talking, even if you've never met them. And
it's easier as a podcaster for people. You don't even have to hardly write many questions. You just like start talking. I mean, I think for some of them, if it's like more of a specific thing, they know a little bit about their guest and like what they do and the general topic.
Yeah, I mean, there's different approaches. There's more formal approaches. That's having bullet points and specific. Sometimes you want to have a high-profile guest, and you want to make sure you get the most out of that. And respect people's time. It depends on the purpose of your podcast. This is definitely a more open.
My
open-ended.
podcast, the vibe is, I think, very Rogan-esque in the sense of like, I simply want to have. I just want to have conversations, and I have good conversations a lot of the time with a lot of people. And I was like, I think it'd be better if this was recorded and shared with people. And I wonder if I started. Imagine if I started keeping like a microphone in my pocket or something, and I start recording conversations I have with people, and then at the end I say, "Hey, I just recorded this. Is it cool if I publish this conversation we just had?" Because I wouldn't
like secretly.
I wouldn't do it without their consent. I would secretly record and then let them know and say, "Hey, can I publish this?" And then do a little intro at the end that I add on. Because think about the authenticity.
Okay, so
the authenticity
this
is so
reminds me
high.
of- I took this like the one. And when I went to college, okay, so I was studying music, so that was valuable to me. And then, but I took some of these gen ed classes, non-music classes that were like, you had to fulfill these requirements, and most of them I didn't like. But I liked one class outside of music. It's a sociology class, and this professor was like pretty kind of like off the beaten path, and we were like listening to like This American Life episodes and writing about it.
Oh, interesting. What is that?
And
I've
that's
heard of
the
it.
Ira
I've heard
Glass.
of it, but what do they talk about?
It's basically capturing. The purpose of that show is capturing stories from everyday life and around different themes, and
It's good.
sometimes it's more like political, sometimes it's more just like mundane. It varies, but and it's been going on for like I think 20 years now.
And it's usually really good.
Yeah, I mean, personally, and sometimes the topics are more attractive to me. Some topics are more attractive than others, but I remember doing this class. This is back in 2006, but we listened to this episode. It was about accidental documentaries, and we were talking about like the science, basically like sociology, like the science of can you measure how people live, because basically the thesis was like is it actually authentic if you have a microphone that's measuring things? Does that change how people operate? If they know they're being documented, if you have a documentary, how does that change someone's?
I mean, so much.
Yeah. Like we're like right now, we were talking about earlier. Is this changing our conversation by putting the microphone on?
For sure.
And I think it's changed it a little bit. I think we're pretty close. Like we're pretty down to earth about everything. Mm-hmm. But like it's really hard to make it exactly the same if the microphone was off. And so accidental documentaries was about like
Yeah.
when you found something that was not intentionally a documentary, not intentionally recorded, like you
Whoa.
accidentally found a piece of paper on the ground that had like someone's notes about something. Now you have this document,
Whoa.
but they didn't know that it was like going to be analyzed sociologically. But now it's much more raw.
This teacher would do that.
Well, this was what like this episode of This American Life was talking about. And what we were kind of studying is like, is it possible to have like objective study
Actual documentation
Yeah.
rather than
Of
BS.
life. Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
Unless it's like individual journals. Basically,
Yeah.
it's a requirement that people don't think it's going
Don't
to be
know that
documented.
it's going to be analyzed or whatever.
Wow.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, because that's actually like a lot more real. Right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. And then we read
Have you
this-
heard of the book A Renegade History of the United States?
Yeah.
That's based on similar stuff, meaning like he takes like data and tells the story of the United States. So maybe like all the news articles said one thing, but then there would be other evidence. Like for example, in New York, right before the Revolutionary War, there were enough taverns in the city of New York for more than every single person in the city to be drinking at the same time. Plus excess space
Yeah.
in each bar, right? That's not even close to like that right now. But like, and that just shows you a lot about the culture of the United States at that time, in a way that a news article probably wasn't talking about that, maybe, or whatever. Now, and people didn't know consciously that those were kind of the kind of data that were being collected. Make sense? Like, and there's other things he talks about too, like just like looking at. Right before the Revolutionary War as well, you could take a club, you could take like a bar or a brothel. I think it was like 60% of bars in the United States before the Revolutionary War were owned by women.
Yeah.
And in one of those bars, you could see black men, red coats, and like American women all partying at the same table together and like getting drunk. And there were like black prostitutes getting with British soldiers and all kinds of things that people usually don't think was happening in the United States, given like our traditional model of history.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant because like that's data that reminds me of what you said. It's like so I think that, I guess what I'm getting at is that I think that when you look at raw like data and information that people don't expect is going to be like later collected, you might actually be able to get some more authentic things. I think that's why it's called A Renegade History of the United States. It's like I think you can just kind of access truths through data points sometimes, because people aren't expecting to be like measured in that way. It's not like those people partying one day knew. People would be like, wow, look at that. They were like African people and white people all partying together while there was still slavery.
Yeah. His thesis is basically, these are the people who are just trying to live a free life. And I'm going to do whatever I want. I don't care what the establishment thinks. Just living life rather than the official history books would be talking about, officials and governments passing laws to change the course of history.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, these people are, like, you could argue those women owning those bars are like the original feminists.
Oh, well, obviously. Yeah.
Like, they're
And
taking
you know what?
power.
To go into that a little more, that book, I've only read the first like 10% of it, but like it gets pretty fucking fascinating. Like he talks about how, what was it like? It was actually like after the revolution, the oppression of women really began in the United States. There's a lot of theories as to why, but like there's like writings of the founding fathers of the United States writing things that one of the reasons some of them wanted a revolution is because they thought the British weren't doing a good enough job at like policing American men, because they thought American people were like complete savages, and the founding fathers were all these like fine, classy men who wore nice clothes, whereas all the other Americans were like complete savages, just like drinking like maniacs. Complete debauchery. It was like it was the party place. It was all the people who didn't want to live in Europe who like came over and were acting like
the Irish
nuts.
Immigrants coming over, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, though, I don't even think there was many Irish, though.
Are you talking about pre-revolutionary war?
Pre-revolution, yeah. And one of the
Oh.
there's writings. I can't remember which. But there's a couple writings that Thaddeus Russell cites in the book of revolutionary people, writing like how they were like disgusted with the state of the people of the United States and they wanted a revolution because the British weren't like doing. It was clearly not working because of how belligerent of a people were there and things like that. I think they also hated the taxation and the liberty stuff as well. But it's just interesting that he goes into that as well. And then the oppression of women came like way later. Like laws that were like laws that suppressed women in the United States didn't exist for like a good couple decades after the Revolutionary War, because there hardly were any laws.
Yeah.
Those had to be passed, right?
Right.
So women's freedom was taken, actually, and they already had it.
Yeah. Well, I wonder how much of the Puritan roots contributed to that. Like the American culture is distinctly, I know Thad's talked about that, the Puritan age, the Puritan culture of, never talk about sex and,
and Puritans like a
idleness is the devil. All that's like that's like a pretty strong seed of American culture, like all the way to today. And it informs
do you think that's schools. Like a massive part of why Americans have like this like insane self-worth associated with their productivity level? Like most Americans?
Definitely related.
Much less so in Europe. It's not even a white thing. It's like it's an exclusively American thing. That if you're not
if you're
not productive at all times, you're worthless.
You could argue that like is why America like became an quasi-individualist country, because of that mindset of like just work for the sake of work. That's that's the Puritan work ethic, is work for the sake of work.
And Puritan is that, when you say the word Puritan, is that like a specific type of Christianity, or is that a word to describe that culture of that type of those people specifically? Or is Puritanism a Christian sect? Do you know?
I wouldn't feel comfortable saying I know, but okay. I know that like the Puritans like is like Puritan New England, like pre-revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. Idleness is the devil.
Yeah, it's definitely a distinct American thing with the work ethic as well as like anti-sexuality. I mean,
that was very specific. Well, that's interesting though, because of how explicitly sexual the United States was before the revolution. Like I said, it seems it was like hardcore. It's like the most sexual place on the planet potentially. People were like,
well, there's different pockets of culture. Like they're like competing pockets of culture.
Yeah, like there's Thaddeus Russell talks about how Thomas Jefferson, or one of them, could have been walking down the street and like would see people like literally having sex with prostitutes like in the street in front of the bars.
Yeah,
like several.
Well, no, that's how. I mean, it still exists today. Like there's still this duality through today of like. I mean, even just recently, like the Super Bowl halftime show, people are having controversy about that. Like Beyonce.
Was it like slightly sexual?
Beyonce? Was it?
I have no idea. I didn't watch it.
Not Beyonce. It was Jennifer Lopez.
Okay.
And like, she's dancing to,
Was it a little sexual? Was it like slightly sensual or something?
I mean, I think it was a little more overt, but like the whole there's the whole pop culture and like. There's plenty of sexuality in American culture.
More than most.
But that's competing with this, like, don't talk about sex, right? All sorts of...
They sustain each other, actually. Like, the extreme sexualization sustains the don't talk about sex, and the don't talk about sex sustains the sexuality.
Yeah, it's like alcohol, too. It's like, the drinking age is 21.
And it's the biggest drinking country, yeah.
Higher than any other country, and so now there's more binge drinking with teenagers. Teenagers are having sex, but no one ever talks about it.
Same thing as conservative and liberal. But the radical of each creates and sustains the radical of the other. This gets back to the duality stuff we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, well, and it also gets back to the extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation, I think, because it's like...
What do you mean?
So if you're told like you're not, well, it's like the alcohol example, like you're told that you're not allowed to drink and that's bad, then you're gonna be like, your inner rebel's gonna come out and you're gonna want to drink.
Of course.
Right. So it's like with going that relates to like the example from earlier about going to the gym. If you're kind of willpowering your way into going to the gym to exercise, you're not striking the root. You're just like trying to force yourself because it's a productivity thing you're supposed to do, or it's a healthy thing you're supposed to do. Then you're not actually going to be creating long-lasting healthy habits and healthy mindset, and you might actually rebel against yourself and not go to the gym.
Whoa.
Where if you actually strike the root,
as I did earlier, as I told you I did,
motivation,
then
it solves those things. And so like, these competing forces are like fighting against each other. Like, do it like this, do it my way, and it's like,
See, I wonder like how people can like escape the nonsense of feeling like they like societal pressure of doing things such. Because I actually feel like I'm very lucky because I feel like I have like almost 100%. I mean, like in social settings, I still probably the way my cadence is, I still probably act according to social norms significantly, which is fine because it's just like how we communicate, right? Or like if I have an insecurity, and so I might say something because that's what I'm supposed to say in a social situation. But as far as like life choices, I feel like pretty freaking rare that I'm doing something for like the pleasure of society or anything anymore. I don't really know. I feel like a little lucky just because I was raised in a fairly like like I've told you a little bit about, like, you know, 5 of my older siblings, none of them have a college degree. All are doing quite like pretty well for themselves and they're generally fulfilled and happy and like all these things. Neither of my parents went to college, but like so I definitely and just like our general family vibe is like F the man. So like I think I'm a little lucky in that way that I never really. I did have a transition. Actually, that's the kind of crap. Because I still went to high school, the idea when I wasn't going to go to college was like a big deal for me. I did have to like overcome. Sometimes I like forget my younger self because I like know who I am today, and so I think that it was always this way, but it wasn't. I did have to like, what's the word? Like overcome societal norms and just not care. But I don't care at all now. As far as like the way I live is very unconventional. And so, why? What is that? Because, like, you say all these things, like, oh, there's these dualities of don't drink, all this stuff. And then people are, like, being motivated about that.
Right.
I think there's some people who drink because they just want to. And there's people who don't drink because they don't want to. And that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Just do what you want to. I think that's pretty much, like, the best way to describe any life philosophy. That's good. Just do what you want.
Yeah, I mean, we're raised in school to like follow the herd, you know. So if you went to school, then it's pretty likely that you develop that like mindset of I'm gonna look around me and see what's everyone else doing. What am I supposed to do? Like that's a cultural thing that it's pretty ingrained, and yet it takes extra effort to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't go to school, I think if we had
That's
a whole like unschooling,
if
we had a whole unschooling in like society, it'd be like a whole adult world that all been unschooled basically, or they had the choice of how their education was going to be, then it'd be a lot more customization and a lot less of those sort of cultural forces of like things need to be like this. We as a society need to be like this. It'd be a lot more decentralized in how we operate in these preferences.
That's such a silly way to exist. We need to be like this.
Yeah, it's way better.
Why? It's so much suffering too. For the people telling people to be a certain way. Like, that's what I'm just trying to figure out. Like, why is it? Why? I guess, like, people say it's simple I'm talking the wrong direction. It's, like, simple biological stuff of, like, oh, everyone needs to be for the herd because of survival and stuff. I don't know if it's that simple. Like, today, like, part of me thinks that our psychology is intelligent enough to recognize that a lot of those basic things are no longer necessary, and that actually just overcomes that by that recognition, right? Like, for example, if I can truly get to my touch of agency where nothing can harm me at all, I can be killed, but nothing can harm me. Maybe the consciousness dies with the body, but then that seed of integrity, that seed of like that structural integrity, that seed of absolute calm and peace is unchanged no matter what. If you can reach that place, I mean, that's not like full enlightenment, but if you can get pretty close to that place most of your waking hours, a lot of those biological things become irrelevant to you.
That's the game. Like,
it's kind of crazy.
I don't think humans have ever actually. There's never really been a society that's self-actualized.
No.
So yeah, so I mean, so you have hunter-gatherers, and there's plenty. Maybe they're healthier in some ways, like physically and whatnot, but there's plenty of conformity in these cultures, right?
I'm sure more than
if you like asserted yourself,
you get killed.
Yeah.
Not in all of them, but some of them, I'm sure.
And now we're like, as a species, I think, trying to like, we're like having that growing pains of trying to battle those tendencies to conform, and those of us who are taking this path of trying to author our own scripts are moving the species forward, I think. Not that it's like any sort of martyrdom of moving the species forward, but that's like a way better way to live, I think, when you're
happy.
Being your own self, like embracing your embracing your uniqueness, embracing the fact that you are the only you that will and has ever existed, and that's a beautiful thing. And expressing that to its fullest, like that's the game, man.
Yeah. I've been thinking about how, like, it's interesting that this is a little bit of a left turn. A lot of people say that, like, a lot of, like, people, especially more, like, liberal people, tend to think that, like, Eastern philosophy and all that stuff is, like, more collectivist or more, like, compassionate to others, thinks about others more and stuff like that. But it's actually, like, especially in terms of, like, Buddhism and things like that, like, it's pretty much, like, about your own enlightenment. Like, there's not a lot of talk about helping others. I find that very interesting. And so I've been thinking about how it's interesting that, like, a lot of, like, ego transcendent stuff is actually, like, extraordinarily individualistic, right? Ironically, if someone completely transcends their ego and they're just, like, this silent witness without their sense of, like, who they are and their identity, and they're just, like, an existing being, right? Some like objectivists or Randy people like, that's so evil, that's not individualistic, you know, your identity is everything, and all that, which might be fine, that might be true, but it's interesting how that ego transcending is also extremely individualistic, because then you have nothing but yourself. There's literally nothing left. No sense of identity, no sense of what society's told you through your conditioning or your biology what you're supposed to do. You're just a seed of willpower and nothing else, and then you do whatever you want. Or some people say that when you become so present in the moment that you reach a place where nothing exists but the raw experience. Like sometimes you're doing a flow state. You kind of don't exist anymore for yourself. Right. You just are a thing. There's only the experience. There's only the action. There's a dynamic process of what's happening. And you actually can be gone. So it's also not individualistic in the sense that you sort of merge with the activity. Maybe not metaphysically, but as far as you are concerned. And I think that complete presence is where you're always in that flow state for some people where you just kind of merge with whatever the experience is you're just experiencing. And which maybe isn't good for all the time, but it's interesting how, like, some people might say that seems unindividualistic in the sense that you're becoming, like, collectivized because you're, like, at one with all the universe or whatever.
That's the typical interpretation of it, of the Eastern philosophy, is like you're one with the universal consciousness.
Which is true.
I don't think it's true, but...
No. I'm saying they do talk about that. So that's there too. Yeah, I don't know if there's a universal consciousness. I think that's a bit out there.
No, I mean, Brandon talks about this at the end of Honoring the Self.
I didn't finish it. I read all of it, but like the last chapter or two.
Oh, read the end of it because he.
Well, it's all about egoism,
the very
right?
last two paragraphs are brilliant, but he specifically has this critique of Eastern philosophy and what we're talking about with consciousness,
and like the oneness of all things.
Yeah, when you say you've merged with the experience, whether that's a flow state or you've meditated to merge with the universal consciousness. His basic critique is, well, then who is the one who is having the merging experience?
You.
There is a self having the merging experience.
I'm trying to think about this.
Who is the one experiencing the non-ego?
I don't know. I think that analysis is still coming from a place of mind and ego rather than from a place of experience. So there's almost like there's a key difference here. Because when you're truly in flow state, you're not really having the experience as far as you. And they might say, this isn't just all of Eastern philosophy, it's someone who believes this might say that, I don't know if this is what I believe, but they might say that, like, in that flow state of raw consciousness, you're like, the individualization is no longer there. Right? It's just the thing. So there isn't anyone. No, but I see the validity of that.
That's why he's taking
who's having the experience.
He's taking this objectivist lens on it, where it's like, well, if we could document this occurrence in reality, then who is it that we're witnessing having this experience? There's something that's having this flow experience. The experience is not happening in and of itself; it's happening by consciousness.
If the entirety of your consciousness is the experience without a sense of identity, is that possible? But then you can remember it. So clearly
Yeah.
you had it because you can remember it. But can you truly remember what it was like if you're not in it? Or can you just conceptualize it?
You by saying you're in it, you're presupposing that the you is still there.
It could just be a language thing, though. Let's say the experience is happening and there's nothing else.
I don't see how it's a language thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you square that circle. Like,
I like that phrase.
I mean, I
square that circle.
get that the sentiment of saying that it's this dissolution. I don't know.
Some people might say that, like, when you get to that state of transcendence or whatever, that when you're truly raw experience, you like. It is through that the merging happens. But that's something that you could only have through experience. But they might say that at that point, if there is, let's say, like the cosmic one, right? That at that point, the one who is having the experience is the cosmic one. And the individualization is no longer there. You are just the cosmic one experiencing itself.
I see what you're saying.
The cosmic one is both the experiencer and the experience. I think that might be kind of the idea, is that when it's raw experience, there's just existence and experience. And sure, there's you, but you're just a part of that equation. That is ultimately this cosmic one. Like there's just this rawness of experience, and then God or whatever is experiencing it. But like let's say this conversation.
I mean, I think it's a valid concept. Like there is something happening when you change states, right? That is actually something is changing, and it's a super valuable thing to pursue and to talk about and conceptualize. It's just metaphysically, it's actually there is something physically happening.
And it might be,
and someone's actually experiencing this non-experience.
There might be But, like, do we talk about the goldfish thing? I think so. Like, Alan Watts has a video where he just talks about when you see two goldfish swimming in a circle together in a fishbowl, you can see two goldfish, individual goldfish, swimming around. But you can also see it with equal validity as one dynamic process, which is two goldfish. And the only thing that makes that not one dynamic process is the human mind's identification of it as two separate things. Sure, there's different densities of atoms and different types of movements in different spots, but ultimately, without the identification of it, it's just one continuation of atoms. There's the water, there's the goldfish, there's the bowl. It's just a continuation of atoms and physical matter. And then we see different colors and we see different densities of atoms, and we say, okay, here's where the fish begins and here's where the water ends. And we're going to label that fish and that water because it looks like this way and it feels this way and it's a little different. But it's still just one dynamic process. And you can then expand that bowl out to the entire universe. Even this conversation. There's Joel and there's Jackson, there's our physical bodies and all this stuff and our consciousnesses and the conversation. We're looking at each other. But there's I feel like the only thing that's making this a separation of your ego and my ego and your face and my face and all this stuff, and there's air here. But there's really just a continuation of atoms from my face to your face and this desk, this apple, this microphone. There's just a continuation of atoms. If our minds were not here to label these things as separate individualizations, all that would be here would be just this continuation. And yes, this table is more dense and has a different type of atomic structure than the air next to it. But that's all it would be. This wouldn't be a table or air. It would just be the continuation of space or lack of space, which would be all of it. Even the lack of space contributes to that great whole.
Yeah, I mean, when you put identification in there, I guess that is employing the human volition and creating concept. I mean, I guess I can't necessarily argue with that. That's like the two fish they're all flowing atoms. All I can say is that I know they're slightly related, is that there definitely is a difference between identifying a physical reality and then identifying an abstraction, meaning a crowd of people versus people. Like, a crowd of people does not exist in physical reality. right? A crowd.
Oh, it's a concept.
Crowd is an abstraction, right? As soon as those people walk away in different directions, the crowd is not there. So there's not a physical thing there.
Whoa, that's amazing.
Just like a forest is not a physical thing.
A tree might be a thing.
A tree is a physical
10 trees
thing.
might be a thing.
Just so it's the same as like America is not a thing. America is an abstraction.
For
all we have is
yeah.
These lines are abstractions. They're concepts of nation. These don't exist in physical reality. They don't exist. Government doesn't exist. Government isn't a concept.
Most authority doesn't exist in that case then, right?
Well,
besides the physical control exists maybe, but like...
Yeah, all we have is we do have individual humans making decisions. That's happening in physical reality.
Yes, which is true.
But I guess
in the sense that within our identification of them as individual humans, that is happening. So those atoms and those different densities of atoms, all that are moving in the way they are. So you have both. Like the individualization exists because atoms have collected in such a way that you can draw the line and say this is one set, this is another set. And it's also only one continuational universe. Everything is one in that sense. And you can categorize those different things individual, but it's almost like both are true. Like you said, like the goldfish bowl has the
defining the existence. You can, if everything does break down to atoms and whatnot, then you can look at that as everything is atoms. That's fine, but like
or non-atoms
for any sort
whatever.
Of practical application that's relevant, the law of identification comes into play.
If that was true, the last sentence, if any practical application was relevant, I wouldn't see a great amount of I don't think that billions of people would consider this way of thinking. I think that a great deal of people find like incredible peace or like happiness and almost like overwhelming ecstasy sometimes in the idea of feeling connected to the oneness, of like meditating and focusing on their oneness with all things. Which is objective, right? Like we just concluded, and to just one exercise someone can do that I've done is you can just sometimes for like a meditation you kind of sit up and you can feel the edges of your body, and with each out breath, you imagine the edges of your body just slowly diffusing, and you can just try to like slowly imagine your being just like slowly diffusing into your environment in a way.
Yeah.
Even just doing it for that one breath, like it feels pleasurable. It feels good to do that. And then someone does, I read this thing about a guy talking about like a psychedelic thing. He wasn't even on psychedelics. It was just in the psychedelic book. And he was talking about, he would do a thing where he would say his name 3 times. Like Jackson Sullivan, Jackson Sullivan, Jackson Sullivan. And then let go of it completely. Of like all sense of self and identity with like his out breath. Very hard to do. But I've done some stuff like that where it takes like longer, and it's pretty fucking powerful. There's like an incredible ecstasy to it.
Yeah, see, I think it's really valuable. Like I said, the concept of oneness of consciousness is a valuable thing that brings this kind of pleasure.
Brings people together.
We just want to look objective metaphysically. Who is experiencing that oneness again? And we're just talking about like looking at objective reality. But I'm not dismissing the value of. I mean, it's interesting because I'm pretty much. I mean, I don't like labels, but I pretty much don't believe in like typical like God, right? Basically, right?
Same.
But I've been kind of contemplating like playing with this idea of like tapping into a source or whatever. Or
Me too.
one. And I'm like, there seems to be some like, I feel like a little bit more connected, or I feel more pleasure in life when I start thinking that way, rather than just like, no, nothing is there. It's just nothing. It's just random people walking around the planet. But I can still believe that, or I can still like know that it's metaphysically not happening or something. But
diving into that, what I learned about myself, and this may be happening with you, maybe not, was that I was afraid to truly allow myself to dive into that possibility and consider the idea. Essentially, what it comes down to is the substance of consciousness in any regard able to exist outside of the physical body. That energy or whatever it is. That's what it comes down to.
I don't think that's
okay.
I don't think you can have consciousness without matter.
Well, that's not what I said, though.
What did you
Because
say?
some I think in Taoism and some parts of Taoism, they might, or at least this is what Alan Watts talks about in one of his videos, they might actually see that physical matter and consciousness necessitate each other in a dualistic way.
Ooh.
That they literally are, and that shit gets a little heavy for me to fully comprehend what they're trying to say, but that this apple in me, that me observing it and it's being observed are a perfect dualistic balance that necessitate and create each other. So that consciousness is not necessarily separate from physical matter. Physical matter and consciousness, which are both just some it's a hippie word, but they both might say that both are just energy, right? Like you can feel your emotions in your physical body or whatever, feel that physical energy in your body, which anyone can feel. It's not even like a hippie term. You can like just tune into the sensation of feeling your hand. What does that feel like? It's a feeling physically. It's in your nerves. There's kind of like a buzzingness to it, or like a slight vibration if you look into it. And if you look right now, you feel your hand. And physically just have that feeling of hand. And then notice your consciousness itself. It's a similar feeling. On like in a physical way. Do you see what I mean?
I didn't fully follow you on that, but I trust that you're relaying your experience accurately.
I would like to. Or like try to feel what your consciousness feels like physically.
I don't know. It's a really weird thing, consciousness. Like, what is...
So
Because, like, we know, like, if we can talk about the brain, neurons, and all these
Doesn't
things,
tell us
but
anything.
it's like... But at the same time, I don't see how it's physically possible to just have conscious... Like the concept of soul, like, your soul, once you die, is still around. It's like,
what does that even mean?
What is the physical properties of the soul?
Mm-hmm.
What's the atomic structure?
Some might say if consciousness exists in terms of like connection to the brain, you can witness the brain doing certain things with consciousness. Someone might say that all of matter is doing something similar in a consciousness sort of way. But getting back, this is all like pretty abstract. Getting back to what you were saying about the idea of, let's say like a source that you can tap into for intelligence or whatever, that you can receive information or any of that kind of thinking or receive energy
Just feel
or insight.
feel a sense of love to all living beings.
Totally. Feel a connection to God, essentially, but not like your typical Judeo-Christian or anything like that. But a sensation of, for me, it's like the oneness of all things. It's like an omnipresent energy or force or whatever. Yeah. That, number one, there's undeniable value in maybe accessing that, even if it's just your subconscious mind. But what you're saying is, all this was because I was trying to get back to saying, I learned in myself that the reason for a long time I wasn't willing to truly, like you were talking about finite, infinite games, the reason I wasn't willing to truly dive into that and explore that was that I didn't like, I had an internal social pressure that was irrational, and I had a lot of rational friends, and my identity considered me to be a rational person. So this is about me, not even people who would judge me. My identity was like, no, I'm a rationalist. I'm a rational person. Yeah. And that prevented the value that I might draw from allowing myself to explore things with my own consciousness that could like transform my existence in terms of like connect. That was the only thing, was the ego attachment to being rational. Because if rationality is just about, in a way, measuring experience, because empiricism, like we talk about, is completely contained to your nervous system. If I have an experience, like my experience of vision that shows me studies that say that science has concluded this is an experience of my nervous system that I trust to be accurate. If my experience is that of feeling connected to some sort of higher energetic source that is also an experience contained to my nervous system, that rationality might say in certain situations I can apply a similar level of trust to that experience as, say, just my physical, like the light waves are hitting my brain is converting light waves into information. I trust that my brain is doing an accurate job of doing that. And so that's an experience. So is that of feeling connected to like a one source or an infinite intelligence or whatever. And the only thing preventing me from considering the second one was my attachment to like this I'm rational ego identity.
Yeah.
And I feel we haven't even dove into the actual
we
haven't actually discussed the actual like idea of that infinite intelligence quite fully yet, but like that was I think there's lots of value in letting go of that ego identity attachment to rationality.
it's a playfulness. It comes down to
Totally.
playfulness. What we talked about the other day is suspending disbelief and just for fun. Like, why can't we just exist for, like, play is all about doing things for the sake of, right? And so I'm gonna entertain
totally.
this. I'm gonna entertain this.
And-
Put this, take this car out for a ride, basically, and let's tap into this consciousness that maybe it doesn't exist, like metaphysically, but
Could also be your
I'm
subconscious.
going to, and also it's like the language too, and our attachment of meaning to language, which can be fogging up the actual truth.
Totally. Well, because you consider yourself a rational person, and so your ego, as soon as it hears ideas like cosmic consciousness, it just turns off.
Yeah.
I've noticed myself, my body literally tenses against that stuff because my
Sure.
ego is like, no, unacceptable.
My body gets, my nervous system definitely is affected when I hear the word God.
Yeah.
There's so much.
Prevents you from,
There's so many years of associations with that word. And there's a lot of I get frustrated with that word.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then there's so many reasons for that because there's
Of
so many
course.
attachments to the word. But it's like
It'd be better if you
can
couldn't.
become aware of that
Yeah.
feeling and then start moving past it. And that applies to a lot of these concepts. We automatically quickly attach meaning to words without questioning the definition or getting more curious about the subtleties of definition.
Mm-hmm.
So when you kind of suspend disbelief and try things on, again, it's just for your own happiness, well-being, play. I'm gonna tap into the. Let's just go ahead and try on the fact that there's the possibility that there's a love source, and that
Steve Patterson talks about this a lot.
Okay, I know. I heard him talk about this recently.
He's like a full converted person about it. Yeah.
Did you hear his thing about
his wife?
No, he had a podcast about this, about the existence of God as nature, or
talking about it because I think that might be sort of in line with my view based on how you just said it.
I have a pretty big critique of what he was saying, but
What was it? What was
but
he
basically
saying?
just saying that you can actually see the beauty, the sense of awe of a mountain range or the sunset. These are actual things that you can identify as this beautiful source of life that is this infinite source. There's definitely something there happening.
But you might all. So my initial thing is that sounds
even if there's
like
not a deity, a Judeo-Christian deity.
Of course, that's kind of like the Tao, just the source of all existence. But that's objective, right?
I think.
No, it is objective in that you could say that if there's an existence, that kind of it is. You know what I mean? There is a source of all things that may not even be outside the universe. But this gets into some pretty sort of metaphysically, spiritual stuff of even this apple on the table, right? Or even just this wood grain on the table. This is a thing. And it has atoms, and go down to the atom, you have planks and quarks and all these tiny little subatomic particles. And
for me, it's all about, is there, with the whole God thing or just consciousness, nature consciousness versus an actual deity of consciousness. That's where I make this distinction and have the critique, where I don't think there's a guy running things.
no,
I don't think there's any sort of
volitional.
Volition is a key here. Is there a single volitional entity that is making decisions? Versus
for man's interest? I don't think so.
Yeah, versus there's a general harmonious energy flowing amongst nature,
Of which we are
that's
also
all great.
part.
I like what George Carlin said about.
That sounds amazing.
George Carlin was always joking about religion, but his whole thing is well, I worship the sun because at least I can see it. I love that. I love the beauty of nature, and somebody might say, oh well, that is God. It's all right, well let's hash out this definition of this 3-letter word, because for me, when I think of God, I'm thinking about dude in the sky. I kind of like the word source.
I like that one. That's a Napoleon Hill vibe, and infinite intelligence. I also like.
And I still have a skeptical part that this exists.
Yeah.
But it's again, we can playfully tap into
we were
it.
talking about earlier. I think the value for a lot of people in considering or even maybe potentially having this idea is so immense that it doesn't matter if it's rational, especially for art. The amount of musicians who have talked about channeling, the idea of channeling, it's like pretty universal for most of the most incredible beauties that have come from man has created. There's a pretty good amount of a sensation of channeling going on. Something from, not like say something from without, but something that's simultaneously from without and from within. That your ego suspends and your hands just go. And then it just happens. And like, there's some artists who have talked about never being able to paint, but they said they learned to channel so effectively. They learned how to get out of the way so well. And they have like incredible, like lifelike paintings of landscapes and human faces, people who have no classical training, but they say that they're able to just completely get out of the way and just like close their eyes sometimes even, and just like let their arm be moved, and some pretty crazy things happen. And like, now some people do that and it's just scribbles. But like,
yeah.
It's like, because then what I see it is like everything is a manifestation of what is. All things, right? All existence is of existence.
We got someone who agrees.
We got the birds. I guess they agree. They're
tapping into the source.
Yeah. Well, they're always in a flow state, right? We think, at least.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I find that here's the other problem, though, and this is a lot of what Eckhart Tolle talks about in Power of Now and just general meditative practice. Like, there's multiple things. There's the mind, which is thought, and then there's like raw consciousness, which is underneath thought. He says it like this, that thought needs consciousness to exist, but consciousness does not need thought to exist.
Sure.
As anyone who's meditated can know, or even anyone at all can know. And when you're in raw consciousness, I mean, usually you can only do it for a couple seconds at a time through meditation. I feel like the longest I've probably done is a minute one time in like a sensory deprivation. Or maybe longer in a sensory deprivation pod, because you kind of just sort of like trance out. Maybe hypnosis is a similar thing. But like, he talks about how he says that there's things the mind cannot comprehend because they're different than the mind. The mind will try to use thought and analysis, and it's literally not the correct tool to understand these things. And so even making these arguments and things is just literally it's not even the accurate measuring tool to be able to understand stuff like that. And that's been my experience. That he talks about how when you're completely in the now and you're observing a tree, and you start to feel this sense of the experience exists, you exist, and the tree exists as one dynamic process, is that when you're completely in the now like this and you just look at things, you can like feel that kind of cosmic oneness or consciousness in a way. You can see in physical reality what he calls being, rather than just your own sensory experience of the tree in your eye. And you're like, wow, it's a beautiful tree for my vision, but you experience it. You experience the being of this green tree in front of you. But you can't think about that. If you think about it, now you're thinking about it, so you're not experiencing the being of it. And he talks about how like when you like can be in a state of pure being for longer periods of time, you'll notice that here's what I find interesting. There are very few people who seem to be in a state of being a lot of the time who don't subscribe to some sort of cosmic consciousness, oneness, etc. And all of the people who mostly disagree with it are always in thought, which is not the same state. So they're making arguments about something that they might not even understand as far as that state of consciousness.
That's fascinating, because the benefit of making the arguments is it's like an objectivist slant of like, I'm going to be looking at what is existing, and understanding it. I think it's very valuable, but that's fascinating. But yeah, the idea of being, you can't think your way. Like, it's like if you're
then you're not being.
If your significant other, you come home and you see your significant other at the house, and then you don't say to yourself, now I'm going to give a hug. Like I'm not. It's like you don't think your way into experiencing a hug with.
But you may think they need a hug.
And but in terms of being in the moment and having a genuine hug, it's like,
if you're thinking, you're not enjoying it.
Yeah.
The same is true of anything sexual.
It's having it's an involuntary, just present moment experience. That's what I've kind of studied this stuff as a performing artist, like letting go to that moment.
I'm sure, as a musician.
Rather than. I mean, it's actually interesting, because it's been a point of strife for me in my as a musician is because I have this streak of rational analysis in me, which I'm super happy about.
Of course,
like diving into philosophy and all this. But it's interesting to note that sort of chattering mind as I dive into the performing artist mode, because that's not really that helpful.
Yeah, and Eckhart Tolle and Power of Now, he talks more again about how like thought is not a bad thing. It is extremely useful.
Right.
But he talks about how he was on a bus when he was like 20 or something, 21, and there was a woman who was talking to herself. And he thought she was insane, and he was sitting there, and because she couldn't control it, she was involuntarily talking to herself out loud. And he was sitting there, he was going to the bathroom at the urinal, and he realized he too was talking to himself involuntarily. He couldn't stop if he wanted to. No, very few people can. And he's like, so all of us are insane.
Do you mean talking in your set?
In your
inside
mind.
your head or all that?
Yeah. The thoughts are involuntary. It is what he calls, it's compulsive thinking. It's not at your will. You're literally saying words all the time. Like a crazy person, you're just not using your mouth.
It's probably more in Western culture,
of
too.
Of course.
Yeah.
Or I think more in just richer culture in general. People are working a lot all day. I think they're doing that less. Just like richer culture in general, I think. Richer. Like, I don't imagine that someone who lives in like Guatemala farming all day is talking to themselves that much. They might just be farming.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong about that. That could just be like an assumption. But like, and so he makes this argument, because the whole book is an argument for the now. And he just makes an argument. He's like, thought is great, but use it on purpose. If you can get present enough that you can just turn on thought when you need to think about where you got to go, and then just turn it off when you don't need it. I love this, my favorite quote, 95% of thought is repetitive and useless.
Yeah.
And if you can just choose to think when you need to think and not think when you don't need to think, you're pretty fucking powerful. And then you can understand what you understand. But if all of your basis, of all of your philosophy, all your beliefs about reality are based on compulsive, involuntarily things that are just like these conversations in your head you can't even control, I think it's an interesting insight into how the integrity of what you believe.
Yeah, I think that going back to directing your awareness, like the ideal is to be able to have the power of both, where I'm going to consciously not be conscious right now.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, because a lot of people are like sleepwalking through life, as Brandon calls it, completely unconscious.
Yeah.
And
they are thinking as well.
Stimulus response, people
things.
like not efforting in their mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much value in efforting with the mind. But part of efforting with the mind is choosing to turn the switch off. You know what I mean?
Which is like, that's infinite power. Because if you can turn off the mind, you're also turning off judgment. You're turning off anything that causes you suffering, essentially. Because then you just exist. And it's just pure acceptance. Obviously, that's like literally the definition of enlightenment. I think that takes...
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone can fully reach that. Maybe they can. If you believe it. But like... That's kind of like what Master Key System gets into a little bit. I think is ultimately being able to have volitional control over your thoughts. But a lot of people have talked about this, even like the business world. Like Tony Robbins says that mastering what he calls internal communication is one of the most valuable things any person can do. Internal communication meaning having intentional conversations with yourself that you are in charge of, rather than compulsive thinking. If you are able to turn off your thoughts, you can say, I love myself, and immediately pause there and have no doubt appear, because you didn't summon the doubt, because you're in control. And it's kind of insane to really think about that level of power. And very few people that I know of in like personal development world even consider this, because it's just so rare, I guess, in the West. The idea of not having thought. But if you can do that, you're pretty. You'll probably do you're pretty all right. And yeah. Well, I was thinking, and what would you do with your time if you could actually do that? It's interesting to consider how would things change. Because it's scary. Because a lot of your goals, most of those goals might start to dissolve, which is really intense. Like, can be scary.
Right. If you're
you can just not think. Then what are you gonna do?
Yeah, the fear probably comes from, if I'm not thinking, that means I am not moving forward.
Yeah, well, I had this when I was starting to read the book, and I did some of his meditations, and then there was times where I became very present. It's easier for me in the car. I can sort of, because I'll be listening to the book and I'll do something where you connect with your body a lot. You just kind of feel your physical body. And when you're feeling your body, you're very present because you're not thinking, because you're in your body kind of in a way. You just like feel the inside of your body. You're trying to like feel your internal organs even sometimes. You like feel it. And he does these things where it's like, there were times where I started to become really present in my life where I wasn't thinking, like for a while. Very like a couple thoughts a minute or something. You know what I mean? It was really starting to, I wasn't in control of it, but I was able to try to hold that space of thoughtlessness for a little bit, right? And it was like I got terrified sometimes. I was like, wait, where am I? Like I went to the grocery store once and I was like trying to like remember how to think so I could say thank you to the cashier. It was like weird. It was like
see, that's
I couldn't think.
I wouldn't want that.
That's like, scary.
That's probably. I mean, I've known about that book for like 12 years.
I think that book is just like something that's just
I think
like,
I have a resistance to reading that book because of this.
Well, that shows that that gives you an intuition that there's probably true concepts in it, though.
Yeah.
Which is valuable.
But
like, that's just one book, by the way, that's like probably distilling thousands of years of that type of thought. Eckhart Tolle is not the pioneer of being present. Yeah, and I was like, I forgot how to think, right? I was able to figure it out. It was just like, it was just so interesting. And I was like, I got scared because there was a while where, here's where I got really scared. I got scared because I was like, fuck, like, what about my goals? What about what I want? I'm just present enjoying looking at this tree, but what about all this stuff? Which, of course, is my mind. My ego coming back saying, wait. And he literally says in the book, he's like, your mind will fight to the death to remain in power. But you want to be in power. And you're different from your mind. Because if you were not different from your mind, you wouldn't even have this intuitive separation. You're listening to this and you know it's true because you're saying, yes, my mind and me will be different, which already implies that you're different from your mind. And your mind is trying to regain control of the ship, but you are not the mind.
Mm.
And he's like, why would you not want you to be in control? It's just like crazy. It's so it's intense. And so I was like, what are my goals and things? And that still happens. Like sometimes I get super present again and I'm like, don't care about a lot of stuff. But then my mind is like, I'm scared. So I think the goal is that if you can choose voluntarily to control it, he says some people enter a state where you're acting a lot more in the present moment intuition. And you're just present with action. Because you can't just sit there all day, right? So you still have goals. Still do things, right? This dude's, I think he's very present and he's published books. He's a millionaire.
It's a matter of what, are you leading yourself, or is there a part, like internal family systems therapy would call it, a part.
I want to learn a lot more about that.
That would be leading, that would be at the center of the living room, is how a metaphor they use. Or are you as your core true self, are you at the center of your headquarters of your mind, directing your volition,
or is
it some other part that's taking over, coming into the play, and that part can manifest as like inner critic or self-hate, you could call it, or.
Now I see how powerful internal family systems could be.
Dude, I love how we're going like naming all these different books and like.
I really am seeing how powerful internal family systems
integrate.
Could be. You can visualize this room, and like for most people, this like destructive part is probably in the center, telling everyone what to do, including them.
Yeah.
And they're like obeying.
Yeah, and for anyone listening who's not familiar, the best way that I describe IFS therapy is the movie Inside Out, the Disney Pixar movie Inside Out. Have you seen that, Jackson?
Yeah.
So it's a profound movie where you have these five characters are inside the head of this 11-year-old girl, and there's fear, sadness, joy, grumpy.
Well, there's more characters too outside of the main headquarters too, right?
Well, there's five characters in her head, and that's it.
I thought there's other ones outside. There's like the fun guy who dies when she becomes.
Oh no, there's the ones that are like below in the subconscious.
Yeah, in the subconscious, there's all of them. Yeah.
There's the five main, but like in the inside her head, like there's literally like a headquarters.
Yeah.
And they're like driving this ship that is her mind, and like different parts try to come in, and like fear comes in, like, oh, we gotta like make sure this is okay. Like this is what IFS is. Like you have a part of you, and IFS would call it like a protector part would come in to protect the exiled part, which would be like the inner child. The fearful part would protect that to make sure that like the painful moments of childhood are not like reenacted, and like that basically like the trauma is not reenacted, so this guarded part comes in, but that's not your true self. Your true self is when these parts are integrated and working harmoniously.
Well, they obey your order. You do it. You're in charge. Kind
of. Not obey, but like you harmoniously work with your parts, and even something like an inner critic, the IFS would say, don't shun your inner critic, but actually be curious about your inner critic and welcome it. Welcome all parts, basically.
Yeah.
And get curious, but know that all those parts are trying to get a need met. And when you were a child, when you had a challenging emotional experience, that part swooped in as a coping mechanism, a defense mechanism, and it was trying to help you get through that, and like we can have compassion for that. So anyway, this kind of all relates back to just if you're the master of your mind, if this like master key system, or you're the power of now, where you're actually the true self is leading, or internal family systems, you're self leading.
Totally.
I mean, all this stuff relates.
It's all the same.
It's all like, it's back to meditation, where you're observing all these thoughts, but then you're centering yourself and making decisions from a centered place, right? That's what it comes down to. It's directing your volition.
That's what I was talking about earlier. Yeah, willpower, like your actual seat of will.
And this we can put a bow on all the way back to the last safe investment, which is
same thing.
If you invest, like in that book, they're talking about. I mean, there's different areas of life you can invest in, whether it's health, whether it's financial investment, career, relationships, but also part of the last safe investment is investing in personal growth, investing in therapy, investing in this whole game of what Tony Robbins talks about, investing in the inner conversations. Like if you are just keep being curious and diving into these different books and like thinking about these from different angles and integrating them together, boiling them all together, then you're on the right path, because you're learning to operate from that headquarters, from that volitional self-leading way. And that's what it's all about. And that's going to give you so many dividends in so many areas of life. And that's what the book's about, the last safe investment, in terms of when you invest in these different areas, then they're going to symbiotically contribute to your true wealth, which is happiness. Not just the typical, like, just save money for retirement, but, like, yes, invest in your financial wellness, invest in your physical wellness, invest in your relationship wellness, invest in your inner wellness. And these things all work together. So invest in yourself.
Yay. Well, that's a good conclusion. We're at about, like, an hour and 23 minutes.
Oh, wow.
No, I didn't think it was that long. That was pretty good.
Dude, that was fun.
Cool. I'm going to end it.